Hey guys, and welcome to the very first episode of Technically Something. I'm really excited to bring this to you. It's a show where we talk about technology, creativity, tutorials, and gaming. My name is Kevin Allen, and the first series that I would like to introduce to you is an intro to Photoshop. This is a tool that I have used since I was a junior in high school, and that was 2003? Anyway, the big thing here is that Photoshop is really cool. Before I started getting into technology, I was actually more of an artist, fine art, like painting and drawing and sketching and all that. I didn't go anywhere without a sketchbook. So now, ever since I went into a graphic design program, I learned so much about Photoshop, Illustrator, and a lot of things that Adobe has to offer. So what I want to do is offer this to other artists out there because it really helped spark new levels of creativity for me and also turn me into a much more desirable professional for the industry. So what we'll be going over in this series is everything from the basics and just getting started to a little bit more complex, dynamic, and challenging techniques. We're going to go over some tools and how to use them. We're going to check out the effects. We're also going to look at filters, and I'm going to teach you some editing techniques to really save you a lot of time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it.
Okay, so the first thing that I would like to go over is if you have Photoshop, then great, we can get started here. You just might need to fast forward. However, if you don't have Photoshop and you would like to try it immediately, one thing that we can do is go on to your web browser. When that opens up, you just type in adobe.com. And from here, you could go and browse through and see whatever you would like. They make it pretty easy to get to all their products. That's what they want from you. But you can click on the search and type in Photoshop. You'll see all the quick link options right here. Just click Adobe Photoshop. New tab will open that will pretty much give you the elevator pitch for Photoshop and why it's so wonderful. You can scroll through and look at all of these great things if you'd like. There's videos, there's all sorts of stuff. However, if you already know everything you need to know about Photoshop and you just like to get it, you go to Buy Now. The photography set here is a pretty good deal. It's about $10 a month. This is a great place to start. You can even do a free trial. I think it's 7 days. But either way, you get that trial. You try this stuff out. If you like it, then it's $10 more a month for the photography setup. Going to open Photoshop. So, in theory, Photoshop will look like this when you first open it. So what do? How do we even start with this thing? First thing that you're going to do is go to File, New. Here a new box will pop up. Now there's a few options. You can name your file. I'll just call it Technically Something. Episode 1. Alright. And here, under document type, mine says clipboard, but if you click this, you can go to a whole bunch of different document types. So if I click US paper, then you'll get different options for print. In this case, the size says letter, but there's also legal and tabloid. Letter is 8.5 by 11, and resolution here, this is important. You want to make sure that, especially if you want to print something, that your resolution is at 300 pixels per inch or higher. If you're doing, basically think of it this way, if something gets really small, then your resolution should be much higher. So the smaller the print, the higher the resolution to keep it sharp. But the same goes the opposite direction. So if you have a huge poster, like a 24 by 36 inch poster, you can then make it like 150 to 200 pixels per inch. And also, you'll hear this a lot, but instead of saying pixels per inch, I'm just going to say PPI. Other people also say DPI, dots per inch. So either way, I'm going to stick with 300, and then color mode, I'm going to stay with RGB because I don't plan on printing this, but the other option is CMYK or even lab. The reason that you might want to use these two, especially if you're a designer, there are companies that have certain lab colors, or they have a specific CMYK or even RGB, and this allows you to access those exact colors. But furthermore, RGB is strictly speaking meant for screens or things that you do on screen. CMYK is meant for printers because it's cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink. And screens are red, green, and blue. And make sure that your background is white. There are other options here, but I'm just going to stick with white, and we'll click OK. And just like that, we're off to the races. So let's look at the tools. And when I say tools, I mean these things off to the left. Now, if I hit these double arrows at the top, this will simply spread out my tools so that they're up higher. I'm used to seeing them all in a single row, so I'll just keep it this way. Now, before we begin anything with Photoshop, it's going to be a lot easier if we have a few images to play with. So what I'm going to do is open my browser back up again, go to unsplash.com. Love you, Unsplash. Unsplash is a CC0 or Creative Commons 0 website, meaning that these wonderful men and women, these photographers, essentially waive their intellectual property rights to the photos, and most of these, if not all, allow you to use them for any purposes whatsoever. So I'm going to scroll down, and we're just going to grab a few random ones. Of course, I could do anything, but I'm picky. So that's cool. So notice how I zoomed in. I'm going to click to zoom in, get the larger version. I'm going to right click, copy image, hit Alt-Tab on my keyboard. This will bring up Photoshop again. And now I can hit Control-V, paste that image in. And over here on the right, you'll notice on our layers panel, and this is our layers panel, snap it back in over here. And that's the cool thing about Photoshop, is you can snap this stuff in wherever you want it. So we have layer 1. I can double click that and name it. Yep. So now I'm gonna hit Alt-Tab again and go back to Unsplash. Click off the picture and find another thingy with, oh, pretty. Okay. Copy this image, Alt-Tab, and paste. Control. Now I have 2 layers. Both are named. And now we can get rolling on these tools and how to use them. So first and foremost, this is one of the most important tools. It's called the Move tool. And as I go through these, I will also teach you the hotkey, but if you ever forget, as you hover over these, it will always show the letter in the actual selection of what you click to access that key. So move is V. And if you have to remember that, just think move, emphasis on the V. So with the Move tool, it's pretty self-explanatory. We can click and move the image that we have selected. Now the funny thing is, even if I click on the white over here and drag, I'm still going to drag that image. Photoshop is a little different than most other software like this, because you select your layer, and then no matter where you click on the screen, you will move whatever is on that layer. Same thing. Even though the sunset is above, if I click on the ship layer, and even if I click on the sunset image, I'm still selecting the ship layer, and I move it around. That's pretty much it. We don't need to dive into the artboard the Artboard tool. But essentially the Artboard tool it's meant for having several artboards. If I click on that, then I were to draw out this area, it creates a new artboard. Several on one document, but I don't want that. So we're going to move right on down the line. Next is the rectangular marquee tool. Let's say all I want from this sunset is the actual sky and the horizon. So I would click on my marquee, my rectangular marquee tool, click and drag a box all the way around it, and see, thanks to the awesome photographer who took this, it was straight on, so the horizon was indeed flat, so that was an easy selection. And this is something that we'll go into more detail about later, but on the layers panel, I make sure that my sunset is selected, and I go down here to the bottom, and right next to the center icon here is this box with a circle, and that is our mask, or add mask layer button. So click that, add a mask layer. But the reason that we did that is because we were able to make a selection. Likewise, if I hold this down, there's other options in here. So there's also an elliptical marquee tool as well. So we can take this, draw out a circle, select or delete or do whatever we want with that circular area. If we move on down, there is the lasso tool. This is a very crucial tool. You'll be using this a lot if you're using Photoshop. And there are 3 types of lasso. They all do essentially the same thing, but just different ways. So the lasso, I can click and draw whatever shape I want, and influence that based on that shape. Another important thing to look at up here, very top of the screen, there are several options, and this is for every single tool that you use. But here under feather, unless you want a soft edge, I'll type 0. Now, when I make this selection, I'm just going to delete this part of the sky out. Hit Control D to deselect. It's an easy way to remember it, deselect. So if we look at that, zoom in, that's a pretty hard edge. But if I use the lasso tool again and turn up the feather to 20 pixels, selection here, delete, and hit deselect, Control D, you see the difference is feather, aptly named because it softens the edges, it feathers the edges. So we can use a hard edge if we need to, or you can feather the edge. Usually I keep mine at 0 just because I'm making hard selections. Step back a few steps here, deselect. All right. Now another great tool is the magic wand. This is for selecting a wide area that is the same color. Think of it that way. So if I wanted to select a lot of these clouds, when I click here on this color, the magic wand essentially spreads out and selects a range of that color, and it bases it off of this tolerance. If I were to put the tolerance to 0, that means it's going to tolerate very little difference. And notice how I clicked in the same spot. So now if I click on that same spot with a tolerance of 100, see how much further it spreads out? So you can control how much you select based on a range of color. And this can be especially helpful if, say, you take a photo of somebody in front of a green screen or even a white background. If there's a hard contrast around their figure, then you'll have no issue selecting them with the magic wand. It's very fast, very easy. There's also the crop tool moving on down. This does exactly what you would think. You can drag it in and crop the image however you like. So, since my images were smaller than the actual border, I'll go ahead and crop it. Then, as soon as you commit any change like this, you make sure that you hit enter. Voila, there we go. The color picker is, or I'm sorry, the eyedropper tool is next on our list, and It's pretty crucial if you're trying to color match something. So when I click on this, I can go anywhere on this screen and click. Notice how on my screen anyway, the ring pops up here showing me what my old color was, my old fill color, and what the new one is going to be on top. Go. Now what it's talking about there is here at the bottom of our tools we have our foreground fill and a background fill color. And notice that it is the color that we just used the eyedropper for. So if I go back and click, pay attention to the lower left of our toolbar as I go across the screen. It's actively picking the color that I'm selecting, and right now I am clicking and dragging while I do this. But it can be a great way to add color in other places that are exactly in the photo. So if I click this rusty spot, I can easily go to our next tool, which is my favorites. Like I said, I'm an artist. So the brush tool, awesome. You can do exactly what you'd think you can do with it. Paint. See, we'll go into more detail about what I'm doing here in just a sec, but I sampled that color from up above. I can make other portions of the ship like that same kind of rust just by painting on the color that we use the eyedropper for. Just one example. That's a pretty fast, somewhat sloppy example. Still, that's one way that you can use that. Also, for any other purposes of creating stuff as you go, you can hide your layers, just like I did by hitting these eyeballs, left side of the layer itself. Go to your brush. If you right click on the screen, you'll see that you have several options. There are so many brushes that come packed with Photoshop that are great. And there are also other brush packages out there from great artists who share custom brushes that are just wonderful. A lot of these can be found on DeviantArt, ArtStation, found some on Pinterest, but you just want to obviously always make sure that you are downloading from a reputable source, that you're not downloading something that's going to get a virus on your computer, but there are some cool brushes out there. But you can get sort of speckly brushes, you can get all sorts of different styles of brush. They're out there on the internet waiting for you to download. So there will be more on that later. Other tools are the clone stamp tool. This is pretty cool. If I go back into our pictures, I can increase the size of my brush. So I right click, increase the size of my brush, and we'll see the circle here. Let's say that I wanted it to appear like part of this was gone. So first off, I'm going to duplicate my layer just to be safe. If I make any destructive changes, I can't go back. So now I have a new copy, a ship copy layer, and I'm going to hold Alt. You'll see that the icon here, the mouse changes into sort of a crosshair. This means that what I'm going to do, as soon as I hold Alt and click, just sampled that picture right there, and now I could paint it on here. Next tool down the list, I'm going to go back to my brush here, is the eraser tool. Hotkey is E for that one, and it does exactly what you'd think. It erases. So let me get rid of that old layer, make sure we're on layer 2. If I go through, it erases what I want, but it works like a brush too, so I can select specific brush types, hard edged erase, or select the hairbrush, erase little streaks. So it's a cool way to customize your eraser depending on what you need. And if we move on down, there are the different fill options. So we have the gradient tool, paint bucket tool, and 3D material drop tool. The two that we're mainly going to be using are the gradient tool and paint bucket. And this is where selections come into play. So if I wanted, I could create a selection, circle, put a new layer above my ship, gradient tool, select the type of gradient I want. There's linear, radial, angle, reflected, and diamond gradients. A lot of times I use radial. Click and drag, and it gives you just sort of like a cool gradient. If you don't have a selection and you just click and drag out, it just fills in everything. Click and drag out. The center point is always going to be the most concentrated portion of the gradient. It'll be full color, and then transition out to transparent in this case, because I have my gradient selected up here. Second option, which is foreground to transparent. That's an awesome tool. The fill bucket it does exactly what you'd think. Create a new layer, hide our last one. If I click, it fills. If I make a selection, then fill inside there, it fills only inside the selection. Pretty straightforward. Then there are other tools like the blur, sharpen, and smudge tool. We'll get into those into detail down the road, but these are more for manipulating. So if we get on a ship layer here and click and drag around, you'll notice as I drag around, it's getting blurred out. So I'll hit Control Z, see the difference there. Sharpen, it sharpens. Smudge, it's a little weird. It's kind of cool. Is you can click and drag, really smudges. In this case, mine really smudges all over the place because I have a strength of 100 on here. I'm going to turn that down. See, slightly smudges it. This is great for reflection techniques, which we'll also do later. What do we got? We got the dodge tool. This essentially make things brighter. There's the burn tool, which is its angry cousin, and it makes things darker. That's one way to add or multiply darkness into a photo. And the sponge tool, but we're not going to use that. The pen tool can be very useful in Photoshop anyway for making selections. Particularly, that's all I use it for in here. You could make custom shapes. It does take a little getting used to. You have to get used to clicking and dragging and getting to that point started. We also have the type tool. It does exactly what you think it does. It does type. Oh, look at that. I have my nerd font. With the text, if you click or highlight any of this stuff, you have all the options up here. So you'll notice the pattern that all of these tools, when you select them, have different tool options up here. Then you have your fonts, switch to, highlight and actively change this stuff, what's typed. Highlight, you can also change if the font has different styles like italics, bold, that you can change the size, and there are just plenty of options for you to check around and play with. Now we're getting towards the bottom here, and there are shape tools that you can use. This is pretty rare when I use these, but they are there. So if I wanted to draw a shape, give it a fill, dropper to make it the same as the text, I could just right click and duplicate the layer. B, go to the move tool. Now I have a sort of makeshift framing for my text. There's also the hand tool. which you can select H to go to it. And if you're zoomed in really close, you can click H, click and drag, and this will move the photo around wherever you need to go. But faster than hitting H is just holding the space bar. As soon as you hold it, that hand will show up, then you can just click and drag. Very helpful, very quick. And then finally, there's the zoom tool. Click on this, and if it has a plus in the center, that means when you click, it'll zoom in. Hold Alt, it'll turn into a minus, and you can zoom out. Other fast shortcuts for this is Control plus, Control minus, and if you want to zoom all the way out and just have the image fill the screen, you hit Control 0. Want to see what this would look like printed or 100% quality, you hit Control 1 for 100. And that's pretty good quality. So I'll hit Control 0 again to zoom back out. Finally, we get down to our fill color for the foreground and background. If you want to change either of these, the foreground is what you will be actively using. So if I have a brush and I'm drawing around on it, foreground color is here. If I want to swap, like say if I want to paint whatever my background color is, I can hit these arrows here, or I can hit X on my keyboard to toggle between the two. If you want to change the color, you just double click it. This will bring up your color picker. That concludes our first episode of Technically Something. If you guys have any other questions for me or things that you would like to see that maybe I didn't cover in this, go ahead and leave that in the comments below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. This is a brand new channel, so all the support I can get is great, and your guys' feedback is completely welcome. Next time we'll start putting these tools to use, as well as looking over other resources on the net that we can use. But in the meantime, I'm glad you guys stopped by. I'm Kevin Allen, and I will see you next time.